right. Well, welcome, Steve. Steve Staten, now of Chapel Hill, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You're not Carborough, you're Chapel Hill,
Yeah.
North Carolina. Steve and I have connected, become good friends, and wanted to have his take on this study that I just presented, that you just hopefully just recently saw on Elohim and Yahweh. And I think he brings some knowledge base to the table and experience base to the table to speak on some of these aspects. And so for the topic, the lens through which we see God, Elohim and Yahweh, a study from both Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And so, Steve, just for the sake of kind of keeping us up to speed, we've been in a fast pace, and I want to remind us, since I don't think we've been watching this video every day. So there, the writers and the sages of old, as we've kind of dived into this material, and a lot of this, as I mentioned in the video, has come from rabbinical sources that not this Christology from kind of our background, our Christian background, kind of reading back into it. So it's very fascinating to see their take. So Elohim, again, is a name, kind of a generic name that was used for God. Many different cultures use that name, and it's a plural meaning of who God is. And then Yahweh is described, as you went through the different study with in Exodus, they describe it as a presence that was before, present, and in the future, as well as a presence, a God of empathy, a God of connection, a God, all these different attributes. And so two different pictures, which I had never really paid attention to in my walk, and has really been very interesting, not just from a knowledge standpoint, but from I think it's changed the way that I've kind of communicated to others about who God is. But Steve, what I wanted to ask you, that's kind of a quick summary, is to kind of walk through your take, maybe on what was shared from these different Jewish sages, as well as maybe we can start by speaking to, how you came to see God, because sometimes I think we can see God in one way or the other, kind of in an Elohim way or in a Yahweh way. And just speak to that, and then we'll just carry on the conversation from there.
When we just speak of God, capital G, in English, often people, even professing Christians, can be drifting all over the place by what they imagine God to be like. A bellhop, a Santa Claus, a nice person, and sometimes they've been influenced by things they've heard out there in society and in growing up, because other religions also have a singular God. Even though the term Elohim is typically plural, it gets used in a singular context quite a bit as well. But when you speak of Yahweh, it's always very precise. It's always anchored to eternal definitions right out of Scripture, with the characteristics right out of Scripture. And it's much more personal. It's a personal identifier, personal name. And the stakes are really much higher referring to Yahweh, because, and as many people don't even know this, when they read their Old Testaments and see the capital letters L-O-R-D for all four, L-O-R-D are all capitalized, that is covering what Yahweh is in Hebrew. Now, there are lots of reasons that happens in most of the translations today, but it does at least point to the evidence that the name Yahweh is so precious that there's a lot of care around making sure in the centuries before Christ that the pagans didn't grab hold of it and abuse it, which actually did happen in an Old Testament story that's very clear. And that just grated the people of God. So there's a whole magnitude of value difference between Yahweh and Elohim.
So, if I was to summarize kind of the characteristics of an Elohim type of view, where it's a dominant view, I would say it's a view of utilitarianism, very utility based, focused on being able to accomplish things. So there's a lot of accomplishment. There's dominance of the environment. There is the absence of the language of connection with God, in the sense, it's focused on that primary aspect. And so if I was to spin it today into our language that we're kind of used to, that I'm used to, I would say Elohim would be, the language would be leaning into Jesus as Lord, to say the least, or discipleship, or what other things are there? Mission is all about accomplishment for God. I mean, these are all good things. I'm not negative on this stuff, but these are where these characteristics kind of land in this utilitarian type of mode. And it's in that mode that I think some of us have landed, and I think our church culture can land. And then the Yahweh side would be more of the connection, emotional, all the Christian songs you hear, but the empathy and being able to kind of walk that route. And I just wanted to ask you, from your own take, how you've seen that on a personal level for you. Which way has been the most dominant for you, maybe in the ways you initially came to God, as well as later life as things have progressed. But also, we'll talk later about kind of overall church culture.
Yeah. So I grew up very devout Roman Catholic. I drifted a little bit in my teen years, but my senior year of college, I was about as Catholic as you could get. I administered ashes on Ash Wednesday, communion, and I did a homily. And I worked with the church, leading events, attended staff meetings and retreats. Some of that was to try to get a girlfriend, but that's another story.
Oh, let's stop there. I want to go there.
So I was really just
Does Trish know
into,
this?
yes, I was into God. Okay.
Yeah.
The God thing. And I was prompted to study the Bible. I got door knocked by two men, a black guy and a white guy, and they were as different as you could imagine. And it moved me. And then I studied, became a Christian, but I was very much in the God thing, the big, entity. But right before I was door knocked, I was also approached by Jehovah's Witnesses, who really probed me about the name of God. So I was thinking about it,
Wow.
but I did not have the resources to really sort it out with the Bible translations and so forth. So when I did sort it out, probably in the first, 5 or 6 years of being a Christian, I started to get blown away by the way Yahweh was being described, and particularly in Exodus and Deuteronomy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like awestruck. And because there's a very distinct God expressed compared to any other religion around his name, Yahweh, what he stood for, what he wanted, which was shalom for the people of Israel. And he's very tied in with what would happen if people understood him and followed what he brought. It wasn't a bunch of rules. That's not the way that I saw him when I started to understand and unpack the name issue.
Yeah, I think the rules, when you bring up the rules element too, I think that leads into the God of judgment, which is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Elohim is about that.
Yeah.
And we see that from his remarks in Genesis 1, like he looked back at his creation every day and said, this is good, or very good at the end. So that judgment, I grew up in the same Catholic background, so it was a lot of judgment. Elohim was very present.
Yeah.
There was it's also a healthy fear of God.
Yeah.
So for me, as I remember my background, my dad was military, so and honestly, I love my mom and dad. Not real connectors in the sense of very social and being able to communicate, but never came into a place where there was a lot of deep connection and deep talks. Whereas my wife, she can remember, conversations with her family that went places, whereas mine were very, they were not superficial, but they were just dealing with the, what was happening at that point in time. So I wasn't used to those type of conversations. And so Elohim would be part of that because he wasn't
Sure.
conversational in Genesis 1. He wasn't
Right.
conversation with Adam and Eve. So I very much leaned into that level. And I think too, I would say Elohim, there's a lot of transactions going on. It's more of the
Right.
transactional God. So as an example, I wanted my sins forgiven. I wanted I wanted to go to heaven, make sure that that was on straight. So I was
Yeah.
checking some boxes, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah.
And I wasn't devoid of the love of God and the cross and all that. But it was a muscle or a part that wasn't really formed in me. And as life kind of continued in my Christian walk, I was being, challenged in that level. I've always had a more difficult time on the empathy and the Yahwehness and everything else. And so coming in, it was very Elohim. But
Yeah.
I think that's okay. I think that's why God starts in Genesis 1 to say, hey,
Yeah.
here's who I am, you know?
Elohim also represents, because of creation, the whole order of the universe. You can actually unpack the organization and the interdependence of ecosystems, planetary systems, lunar, all the way down to the fish and the plants. And that's fascinating to me. It doesn't feel as personal.
Right.
It's mind blowing,
Yeah.
you know, but it's not the same as the persona that we understand from Yahweh as revealed like in early Exodus.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's a really good point because I was the first time I kind of was triggered to look for something bigger than me was when I was in college at age 20 and I was working out west in the Cascades for the state of Washington fighting fires. And I would go up in the Cascades and see these avalanches and see these mule deer and these brown eagles with literally flying over me with rattlesnakes in their beaks, and these hummingbirds that the ball of my fist was they would just come and just buzz me because I had a red backpack or something, and I was just and then just seeing these massive trees I'd never seen. I'm an East Coaster, and I
Yeah,
was just overwhelmed with something is more massive than me. But it wasn't a God moment. It was there's something big out here. It
yeah,
wasn't until later that I wanted to find out that other characteristic. But I do think you're right. I do think that Genesis 1, we need that. We need to be able to look at the systems that he's created, to stand in awe, to stand this is framing who God is, that he's bigger than us. But that in and of itself, I don't think would keep me. I
right.
think that
Yeah,
perspective, many people go out in the woods and say, that's how I can commune with God. But I think it's lacking something. I think it lacks that connection with Yahweh. Does that make
yeah,
sense?
yeah, totally does. Absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, I just, what I wanted to just chat briefly about too was, okay, so we've got this framing and I've been thinking about this a lot. So, we have there's kind of an evangelical, any evangelical church, kind of our history too, that's included in that's very mission minded, very much meeting people, getting out there and doing these different things. I think has a tendency to move in one direction versus another. And I wanted to ask for you to speak. I know a little bit, obviously we share a similar history, but how do you think on a church level or cultural level, understanding these two characteristics of God has dealt with issues in the past, and just moving forward, how would that change things if we are able to bond these two entities together?
Yeah, I would say tapping into the story where Jethro advises Moses how to deal with burdens. And this is all in the same era where Moses has just been revealed who God is by name, Yahweh, the great I am. Um, is the same period that he's learning from Jethro about principles to set up justice systems where being impartial and trustworthy and levels of competence. And even Moses talks about it 40 years later, an embellished system that he learned from Jethro's advice. And what comes out of that is honor and justice and shalom and things that are so important for a community.
Right.
I would have never thought about those things reading the book of Genesis. I would see the book of Genesis as the absence of those things, much like the Ten Commandments are the remedy to all the sins that didn't reflect those commandments. You see in the book of Genesis, scholars have pointed that out. So when you come to Sinai and we receive this code, for lack of, it's probably not the best term, but the law, along with the systems, God is a God of justice, and he's a principle and health and wholeness and wellness and true peace in a community. And that's who he is and what he wants for us as a father. And so I think today, this is what I want to bring to churches. I'm a consultant for churches, so that's what I want to bring to them. But what I sense is churches like the tradition we come from and others have founders syndrome, celebrities, entertainment culture. It's almost like you're watching a show when you go to church, and it's not really about God. And then when there's problems in our bigger church communities, they're not sorted out with that impartiality, that trustworthiness. And where in Deuteronomy, the goal is justice and justice alone. I think sometimes in churches, the goal is make the problem go away or move it or whack-a-mole it. But if we get back to aligning with Yahweh as revealed in the Old Testament, we can see that that's who Jesus was aligned with, his Father, in that sense. I know there's a whole lot there with the triune thing that we could unpack another time, but that's how I see Jesus representing that coming onto the scene. But I don't see that in the 20th and 21st century anywhere near where it needs to be.
Yeah, I think we've got a very systematic way of doing things, and I think it's created, my perspective over the years has been that it's created um, a beautiful sense of moving into community and passion for the lost. I think those are aspects that are significant in the ways that we've learned, being in each other's lives. But I think what happens is that becomes the dominant theme, and we don't move into a place of spending time, thinking of others in a depth that really allows us to partner with them and get into that space. Because I think the story in Genesis 2 of Yahweh is that he was more of a partner. He was right with them, walking with them, asking where they were. There was so much conversation. And I think that, I think there's been a thinness with us. There's a lot of, it's not just our church culture, but many evangelical churches today are in a space where people are just not engaged. They're leaving, especially COVID. But I think that's just showing what the issues might be. And I really believe that we truly get excited. I can only get so excited about mission and about the heaven hell question and all that stuff, which is incredibly important. But if I don't go to a level where I understand the incredible God that I'm serving, that that takes precedence. So I think we've in the pace that we've been in, the space we've been in, it's been detrimental to our spiritual health and our maturity in going from one place to another. And I think the ways that we've kind of talked to people about the transactional nature of what it means to be a disciple, I think leaned heavily on man's efforts rather than on moving towards all these things kind of come to mind for me. And I do think we have to really flex that other muscle, not to the detriment or the delinquency of understanding the justice and everything of God. But I don't know, little blabbing on there, but does that make sense?
It does make sense. And getting back to the original investigation here, the inquiry, the difference in the ways to think about the divine, Elohim or Yahweh, I think not only is important the ways we've discussed, but here's another way. If most people attend church, think of God as a triple decker universe, heaven up here, earth down here, hell down there, and they pray up and they've been checking the boxes. They're just into the Elohim, the God mode.
Right.
And they're vulnerable. And I'll give you an example. In 1963, John A.T. Robinson wrote an article called Our Image of God Must Go. And then it was an intro to a book coming out a month or two later called Honest to God. He was a bishop, and it rocked the world. They only printed 6,000 copies. The Queen couldn't even get a copy. It sold out so fast. He ended up selling, I think, 17 million copies in 30 languages.
Wow.
And what it did was it stripped away the supernatural. It misused sources to say even that Bonhoeffer believed this and so forth. And he had a very compelling argument for secular people that wanted Jesus without the miracles, without the obligations, without going to church. And it caused a wave in society that affected many traditional denominations. Even the song's lyrics of imagine no religion and, all we need is love came out afterwards. Some people attributed those lyrics to the mood that he created.
Wow.
And so why did that successfully take faith away out of many churchgoers? Because they were dumb. They lived a dumbed down Christianity in this triple decker universe of pray up and don't go down and just go to church. And people did not know their scriptures. And so the antidote to that situation going forward is when we bring people into Christ and when we help them grow, is we give them a greater intimate understanding of the whole arc of the Bible story and the importance of the God in the Old Testament who has been so misrepresented, and to represent him properly. Then I think people that attend church and even society is less vulnerable to these versions of the deity that just are there to meet their personal needs,
No, I agree. I think this is a really good conversation, and hopefully those who are watching just us talk, we're just tapping the surface of this, but I do think that the importance of knowing who we're really walking with. I feel like I've really loved the action. you know, I love the results. This was all part of my DNA. I love purpose. I think I'm a researcher with the federal government, and one of the things that I love about my work is that I can write journal articles that are on record for eternity. I guess I don't know as long as they allow it. But my name is on record. I've made it. I've made a dent. I've made a contribution to the environmental world that I'm part of, because so there's something about seeing your name. You want that. So I think
Right.
we want to have impact. We want to have impact with our kids. We want our neighborhood. But as I noticed it, how much of it was, based on just wanting that mission and wanting purpose. Is it good enough? I want purpose, but at the expense of wanting connection on a depth that I think Yahweh speaks to us. And so
Yeah.
I just think it's I think my tendency, and I don't want to speak for this whole audience, but I think our tendency is so much Western that we want all the bells and whistles that Genesis 1 offers.
Yeah.
But Genesis 2, oh, that's a struggle because that's relational. And I
Right.
never was good at that.
Right. Very well said. Very well
Yeah.
said.
Well, listen, I'm gonna keep this short, and I think we've gone probably 35 minutes. But Steve, thanks for your take on this and willing to spend some time in this space of talking about Yahweh and Elohim. I think there's more to come, and invite conversation on this across your kind of your spiritual settings that you're in is talking about these things. But I appreciate the talk.
Thank you, John.
All right. Peace out, and we'll talk later.
Okay, good.